First of all, can I invite up Tobias and Alex Stephanie? Tobias is an investment manager at BMW's iVentures, and Alex is an advisor with Just Park and the author of a fantastic book on the sharing economy called The Business of Sharing. Hi, guys.
Hello.
So first of all, can you guys explain what you're doing and how you're changing the way, how you're changing people's lives? Maybe Alex, Just Park, how's that changing people's lives?
Sure. So we have a thesis at Just Park. It's a pretty simple thesis, and it's this: that parking is one of the most dysfunctional aspects of city life. And it's dysfunctional on many, many levels. It's dysfunctional because it's incredibly expensive. It's dysfunctional because it results in huge quantities of parking tickets, more than £2 billion worth in the UK every year. It's dysfunctional because the space is very poorly utilized. So at car parks especially, often half empty. And it's also dysfunctional for everyone living in a city. IBM did some very interesting research in 2011, and they looked at the amount of traffic and the amount of car pollution caused by people just circling, looking for spaces. And IBM said that it was as high as 30% in many CBDs. So that is an appalling inefficiency, people just driving around, causing traffic, causing pollution. This is a very, very broken experience. It's a very broken experience for everyone living in a city, and in a world in which the majority of the global population lives in cities, that's a real problem for everyone. Now, at Just Park, we think there's a very simple, elegant solution to this, and that is to use the space that we already have and to use it as efficiently as possible. So what we do is we connect property owners with parking spaces. There are 25,000 families and individuals with their driveways. There are large hotel groups like Hilton and Sheraton, and there's all the big parking companies. And we connect those folks with more than 750,000 drivers. And we let the drivers reserve the spaces so that they head straight to a space. So it feels very much like a premium experience, but at the same time, it's dramatically cheaper than parking on streets. So it's typically about half the price of parking on an on-street parking space. So that's a little bit about what we do at Just Park. It's a very simple, humdrum problem in many ways, parking. But the externalities related to it, the inefficiencies, are so great that we see it as a hugely urgent mission for the world to fix.
And when did Just Park start?
It was founded in 2006 by Anthony, and he ran it on his own until 2011. Then I joined the business in 2011 and I've been running it as CEO until very recently.
Great. Tobias, BMW iVentures. I bet most people probably haven't heard of iVentures, so what are you guys doing?
BMW iVentures is the venture capital arm of the mobility services group from BMW. So we invest in startups in the mobility service sector. Series A to C is our sweet spot. We did some seed as well. And our core focus is actually enhancing services, or actually how to get people from A to B most convenient, everything that is surrounded. So our core focus fields are charging, on-demand mobility, of course parking, intermodal wayfinding. So this is, I would say, the core, and we augment services that we actually deliver to our customers. Some of you might know Drive Now, the free-float car sharing service, or Charge Now, and in that nexus, we try to keep our ear close to the industry and the startups to actually connect to the innovators and the thought leaders in that area.
And Just Park is among your portfolio. Yeah. Alex, how did that come to happen, that investment in Just Park?
Sure. So, I mean, this is with the Just Park hat on.
Yeah.
I imagine BMW have a fairly sort of similar version of events, but certainly from our side, BMW got in touch. They are clearly focused on urban drivers, and for anyone driving in a city, parking is a major pain point. And so one of the reasons, as Tobias was saying, that they have a venture capital fund is to solve some of the problems that affect their core business. And those aren't necessarily related very, very directly and immediately to manufacturing cars. Clearly, the way that cars are used exist in a much, much broader context. So they saw in Just Park a very innovative service that could help solve the parking mess really in major cities around the world. Yeah, that investment came through in 2011, and BMW been a great partner ever since.
Fantastic. Now, guys, there are loads of trends going on in the transportation space, looking at the future of transport. Alex is obviously an expert in the sharing economy, P2P, smart cities. I'd love to hear a bit about the trends you guys are seeing in the market. What interests you? What trends interest you at BMW at the moment?
Well, I think the most prominent trends that are actually disrupting and shaking the automotive industry is actually sharing economy, globalization, and digitalization. And we have some kind of outside disruptors actually coming to the automotive industry, which is I think a positive thing in general. Disruptors always come from the outside, and actually the mobility services group where we are working in, and actually with our venture investments, we actually try to stay ahead and competitive in this fast changing market dynamics. So actually, kind of this is actually driving the whole industry, and maybe amongst a little bit in these global trends, we see actually more into kind of developments in algorithms. So really, actually getting things more smarter, more integrated. You can call it virtual personal assistants, but also algorithms that learn, that predict, and kind of help to interconnect different services for a better for a better customer experience. And I think this is also something in the parking space where we see a lot of technology and innovation happening.
And is the idea with iVentures that you invest in these technologies and then eventually build them into the vehicles you're making? Is that the sort of the benefit for BMW?
Yeah, so I think we are you can kind of see us as a classical VC. We invest on VC terms, but in parallel, the selection criteria, how we kind of in what ventures we invest, they need to be or could be partners for BMW, and we have as kind of as a separate part. We agree what we will do together, and it depends a little bit on the stage of the startups. If it's kind of really early stage, it's more explorational. Where they get kind of more mature, we actually integrate them in new services, and we actually did that with Just Park at that time with a smartphone integration. So actually, I think it was the very first time kind of users could actually book their parking spaces in the car, and kind of we could put that on the market and try it out.
Interesting. Alex, what trends are you seeing in transportation, the future of transportation at the moment?
Well, with regard to your question about the sharing economy, I think the first point is that it's almost an anti-trend. So a lot of these forms of behavior in the sharing economy are very old, established forms of behavior. And what smartphones and increasing broadband penetration and social media are doing is they're scaling these existing and very old forms of behavior. And let me give you an example. My dad grew up in Wimbledon. And when he was a boy in Wimbledon, and when there was the tennis championship, people would rent out their driveways. And they would stand there with a piece of paper or put up a little sign saying, whatever it was, a few shillings or something like that, and then people would park there. But it was very, very small scale. And now we have 25,000 families doing the same thing every day in the UK, and many of them are in Wimbledon making hundreds of thousands every tennis championship. Now, the sharing economy is just taking this existing form of behavior, moving it online. It's making the transaction go online, so it takes the friction out of it. It's using social media to create trust between the counterparties. And it's allowing these businesses to scale with a sort of centralized code base. And you see the same thing in most of the other successful transportation sharing economy plays. If you think about BlaBlaCar, quick show of hands, how many people in the room are familiar with BlaBlaCar? So about a quarter of you, maybe, slightly less. So BlaBlaCar is a now very, very large and successful French business. It's expanded into the UK, it's operating all over Europe and in some of the BRIC economies as well. What does it do? It does this. You are driving to another city and you have spare seats in your car. That is a waste. what the BlaBlaCar app allows you to do is effectively sell those seats to passengers who are going in the same direction. So you offset the cost of the petrol, and the passengers in your vehicle, they are able to travel to that destination for much less than the cost of a train ticket. Now, BlaBlaCar are now moving about 2 million passengers every month. So this is a transport network built on existing infrastructure that is moving roughly twice as many people as Eurostar, which was obviously built at a cost of billions. So again, that's a good example of a form of behavior that existed. We all know what it is to, or most of us probably know what it is to push out an arm and try and hail a vehicle and do a bit of hitchhiking. But BlaBlaCar is moving that behavior online, making it much safer and much more efficient. And I think that is a big part of what the sharing economy is doing in this transportation sector, is taking old forms of behavior, making them function much better for a mobile 21st century. I think the other thing that it's doing is it's really leveraging efficiency. So it's taking cost out of businesses. Now, probably if I were to ask the same question as I did a moment ago in relation to Uber, I think probably everyone's hand would be in the air, and if your hand wasn't in the air, it would probably be proof that you might have nodded off. Everyone's now heard of Uber, and why have you heard of Uber? Because it's a much more efficient way of taking a taxi around a city. It's taking huge amounts of cost out of that taxi sector. And so really that's what the sharing economy is often doing. It's putting people together, it's connecting them, it's disintermediating small businesses, and it's cutting cost. And that means that those forms of behavior can really scale up. You know, the reason why Uber has become so successful is because it's so much cheaper. More people start driving, then more people start traveling, and you get this kind of virtuous cycle or network effects, and the business just grows and grows and grows.
But who's losing out in all this? Because it sounds great, people are using Uber, people are using Airbnb, but there are lots of incumbent industries that are suffering.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's an obvious answer in relation to Uber in London, and they've made no secret about it. It's, of course, the black cabbies. And unfortunately, as I think probably most people in this room will realize, there's not a great future for black taxi drivers in London, because the cost of that business is just so high relative to the cost of running an Uber-type business. So those are the losers. It's very unfortunate, I think, for those individuals. But you see this in economies. You see periods of structural change, and it's up to those individuals to evolve their careers, try and upskill, try and move on. It's incredibly painful for those people who are caught up in this disruption. But ultimately, I don't think it's for legislators to privilege a group of people working in I guess, a more old-fashioned industry versus the desires of consumers to move around their city as cheaply as possible.
And last question on the sharing economy. Do you think this is a zero-sum game, or do you think these new services can work alongside existing services? Is it a complete overhaul, or can there be...
No, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think these models are generating real economic value and growth. They're not just moving economic activity from incumbent industries to new industries. And the research that's been done on that, looking at things like dollars brought into cities via Airbnb, show that to be the case. So there will be some cannibalization of often family-run guest houses through Airbnb. But generally what Airbnb is doing is allowing more people to go to that city, more people to spend money in those cities, and often going to and spending money in parts of cities that have been relatively little visited in the past and have benefited relatively little from tourism. You know, doing more with less is how economies are able to grow. Okay? That's how economies can grow sustainably. One of the problems with the credit crunch is that people were trying to kind of hack and fake their way to economic prosperity by borrowing money. But actually what the sharing economy is doing is it's taking existing capacity, whether that is an empty car seat or an empty parking space, and it's creating economic value from that idling capacity.
And Tobias, at BMW, are these issues that you guys are thinking about, these sharing economy businesses and what it's doing to our cities? Definitely,
Definitely. So we did a couple of investments in that area, but we also created a dedicated group. We call it Center of Competence for Urban Mobility within our department that is solely focusing on working with the cities, and educating the cities how to leverage actually the sharing economy and different services for the benefit actually to create more well-being and better living in the city. And kind of it's a holistic approach, because it's not only really driving a car. So it's definitely the parking space, as Alex mentioned. It's it's one of the main kind of drivers that cause congestion and pollution. It's really car sharing, actually better utilization of the cars in the thing. It's electromobility, putting kind of a more environmental friendly technology in the cities, but also fostering intermodal wayfinding. So because not all people want and need to drive. I mean, you also can go by public transportation or bike or walk. And kind of you have to choose whatever suits the best in the situation. So actually, kind of we foster a collaborative approach, or kind of a holistic approach towards the cities to increase the mobility there, because mobility is a very important part of kind of the city quality, next to air quality.
How responsive are cities to these changing trends? Because certainly with Uber in London, we're seeing a bit of a pushback from the mayor's office against Uber's advance. How open do you think cities are as a whole to these sort of trends?
The good thing is, so I think the kind of Uber's approach is actually our benefit, because if we want to put a free-flow car sharing in a city, we have to work with the city authorities, because they need to stay there, they need to park. If we just put 2,000 cars there, we work. So actually, we kind of position ourselves as the good guys. We're working with the authorities. Obviously, there are some where it's quicker, and some it's more difficult. But actually, in general, there's a high openness, and we actually need to increase our team to actually work with city authorities to offer solutions. So actually, I think Uber plays a good role for us.
I wanted to ask you, Alex, about cybersecurity and data, because a lot of these transportation services require people to open up more of their data about where they're going, if it's a BlaBlaCar, their trips, in order to use some of these services. At the same time, cybersecurity is a hot topic at the moment with consumer hacks on a weekly basis. Do you see that being a problem? Are companies in the sharing economy considering this cybersecurity threat at the moment?
I think every technology company needs to consider security. Absolutely, whether you are looking after businesses or an individual's data, or tracking their run on a running app, or their sleep on a sleeping app, or allowing them to rent out their parking space. I think this is something that exists and is common across the sector. Every large business is going to get targeted by hackers. That is just a fact. And so it's up to every large business to make sure that they have the right protections in place. There are some that might be more high risk than sharing economy companies, and there'll be some that would be less high risk. I think there's always a lot of the sharing economy companies are working in kind of real world ways. People are having physical contact with other people, and for that reason, the risk is moderately high, I would say. If you're letting someone into your home through Airbnbs, probably the best example, or letting your children into a vehicle that is driven by an Uber driver, you want to be damn sure that there is robust security, and offline and online security there. So I think it's something that is really common to all technology businesses, and every large business is remiss if they're not giving that very, very close attention.
And BMW, is cybersecurity something you guys think about when you make these investments?
Definitely. So we have not made a cybersecurity investment, but kind of as we're not making kind of having security as a business, but it's as Alex said, it's totally mandatory. I mean, with a 100-year-old brand, people expect a certain. They have trust, and they expect the security. So it's a key focus for our developers, keeping the connection secure. And actually, current the model is you have the back end, and you have a secure connection to the head unit. And actually, if we connect new services, we connect them to the back end, but secure the connection. But yet, kind of with a larger connectivity, with kind of IoT, it's kind of there's really a lot of work putting into kind of really the direct communication between the devices you have and the car to keep it absolutely secure.
And what do you look for in your investments? Obviously, Just Park was a very small business when you first invested in them. What sort of size and scale of investment is BMW looking for in this space?
Usually, kind of our sweet spot is Series A, kind of starting having at least some month of business, so we see some traction in kind of in the business development. We actually categorize our investments in 3 categories: exploration, which is more earlier stage. It's let's say ticket between 1 and 3 million, or 500,000 and 3 million. Earlier stage, large consortia where it's not so close to what we do, and then we call it enabling and acceleration, where we kind of go into more mid and later stage investments up to 10 million and more. But then these businesses are really close to the core. We actually have some kind of collaborative projects, really deep ones, and integrations. So I think it's kind of, it depends a little bit on the area.
And are you seeing these sort of companies on a weekly basis, pitches coming in?
Actually, we have now 2 offices in let's say in New York and in Munich, and kind of as our kind of focus is quite targeted, we get actually a lot of inbound questions in that sector, because it's mobility, and we're one of the most active investors in that space from the OEM side. So we just get a lot. Actually, in New York, we have a kind of a joint office where we have meetups and also co-working space. In Munich, we're actually working on that, but we have other initiatives like the Startup Garage. It's more technology focused and earlier stage, but people can kind of connect with BMW working together in that office. So I think there's there's a good mix about kind of really meetups and kind of from external pitches we get, and of course we just go on conferences and kind of connect with the startups from ourselves.
And obviously, as we saw with Just Park, you offer more than necessarily just capital investment. There's opportunities to actually work together.
Actually, that's the core, I think, for being a strategic investor, and it's. I think this is actually the hardest part, being on the strategic side. So we try to keep the equity investment as clean as possible. We do a lot of co-investments and have just standard investment term, but really to have kind of to leverage on both sides. Kind of being a strategic, you actually have to do something together, and it can range from just leveraging the brand and communication in the early stages to really working together and integrating the services, actually leveraging the customer bases. So I mean, Just Park has, I think now 1 million customers about.
Last data point we released was more than 750,000.
Okay.
Yeah,
but kind of
certainly getting there.
So I think that's kind of we can and Drive Now is kind of in a similar magnitude. So actually there's kind of customer basis that is that kind of we can jointly leverage and work together kind of in multiple areas.
Speaking of investment, Alex, I wanted to ask you about the equity crowdfunding that you guys did. I believe it was the largest ever equity crowdfund for a startup. Can you talk a bit about what that experience was like?
Sure. Yes, so earlier this year, we did the largest ever equity crowdfunding for a startup, as Ollie says. It was the largest on 2 metrics. It was the largest in the amount of money we raised, which was the most we could legally raise, which was 5 million euros. And it was the largest in terms of the number of investors by a very, very long way. So I think the previous largest startup round had been roughly 600 investors, and we had more than 2,900 investors. So it was a fascinating experience and a very, very positive one for the business. We had at that point roughly, I guess, still hundreds of thousands of users. We knew that they were very interested in the business because many of them had come to us over the years and asked us if they could invest. And when we went out to market, of course, we had no idea if they would make good on that, but my God, they did. when we turned the crowdfunding live, there's this moment where you kind of almost, you're literally flicking a switch pretty much, and you don't know what's going to happen. And of course, you're very aware that if the crowdfunding doesn't reach its target, it's just not going to fund. And it's going to be a very, very public embarrassment for your existing investors, these guys, for index ventures, and also very potentially demoralizing for the team. So we pressed this button not knowing what's going to happen. And we decided to email a third of our customers and let them have a sort of advanced VIP window in which to invest. And for the first hour, we had an investment every 20 seconds from a third of our customers. So if we'd emailed them all, we probably would have had an investment every 7 seconds and potentially crashed Crowdcube. The rest, as they say, is history. It was a tough round to get off because we didn't have EIS tax relief, which is one of the biggest reasons that many investors are making these investments in the first place. And I think prior to us, the largest round without EIS had been £100,000 or thereabouts. So we looked at, this was a round that was 20x, if not greater, larger than any non-EIS round ever. And so we were understandably a little bit nervous about hitting that target. But it went very, very well. And what we now have at the business is a very, very interesting investor mix. We have a strategic investor like BMW. We have an institutional investor, Index Ventures. And we have the crowd. And they all bring very, very different things to the party. People often ask me, what is the right type of investment? And it's a bit of what is the right type of investor? It's a bit of a silly question. It's sort of like saying, should I live in a flat or a house? It really depends what you're looking for and what your needs are. But we get different things from different investors, as I say. We get the ability to do cool in-car integrations and relationships with the automotive industry through BMW. We get a great venture capital network through Index Ventures. We get expertise around scaling and potentially IPOing the business. And from taking investment from thousands of individuals, many of whom are customers, we get enthusiasm and we get evangelism for the brand. We get chatter on social media. We get a cohort of customers who are very, very loyal.
What would you say to your fellow startups out there who are considering it? Would you advise them to go for it? What advice would you give to someone thinking about doing equity crowdfunding?
So there are pros and cons, as with taking money from any type of investor. The pros are that you are more in the driving seat in terms of the valuation and in terms of the timing of the crowdfunding. And that matters a lot because especially if you're an early stage business, you just don't know if you're going to be able to get money out of these VCs or where they're just going to kind of dance you a dance. And many companies go bust, of course, kind of holding out for promised money from VCs, whereas you are that much more in control. You're also not giving up preference shares, so you will generally just give ordinary shares to the investors. So those would be the main advantages, I would say. The disadvantages would be that, as I mentioned before, if it doesn't work out, it's very, very public, whereas not getting a term sheet out of a VC is par for the course and will generally remain sort of unknown, except perhaps within the VC industry. So that is a big disadvantage. And I think the other thing is you're just not getting the strengths that VCs will bring. Often in an early stage business, it might be maybe a fairly young founder. You might have a board that needs strengthening, and you're not going to get that from a crowdfunding. For that reason, I think a lot of companies will still continue to want to take venture money. It certainly isn't the death knell of the venture industry by any stretch.
Sure. And both of you, I wanted to ask what you think the commuters of the future, what the travelers of the future will look like. Once we've got services like Just Park, once we've got services like Uber, how does this change the travel economy? How does this change people's lives? Maybe you could paint a bit of a picture of what you see at BMW.
I think in the future, the commuters will be very intermodal and have a wide variety of options to choose. They don't necessarily own a car, especially in urban environments, and depending on kind of their situation, they just pick the right kind of model to move. For example, if it's nice weather, they might take first the subway, then pick up a bike and enjoy the sun. Maybe on a Friday, they don't want to they want to take their friends out in the countryside and don't want to have a driver, so they just take a car for a day and or for an evening and just go and have a picnic somewhere. Or they want to do some work and they get a driver like an Uber or a kind of another service and drive. So I think these services go hand in hand, depending on kind of on the individual need, and it's all powered by the interconnectivity of all the services and the devices. And I think we will see that kind of going forward. A lot really end-to-end, also booking or actually travel management from point A to B over different modalities, and also choosing, and you can choose and actually get recommendations from the system what is kind of correct and best for you, depending on your budget, depending on kind of the way how you want to enjoy.
What's
you're right.
BMW's attitude to what you mentioned? People will have less cars. You won't necessarily own a car. BMW being a car maker, what's their attitude towards that?
Well, definitely we think as a premium car maker and making really kind of these, or actually buying premium cars is a very emotional act. I mean, if you're rational, you wouldn't buy maybe a $100,000 i8 or 7 Series. So there's an emotional part. So we think we still keep a large part of these customers, but also especially in urban environments, it's just more convenient actually not to own a car, and for that we're actually quite active with our mobility services to offer these customers who want a premium service also kind of these mobility services to get from A without owning and still making money of these. So actually this disruption is a chance, because we're actually creating new business. And as Alex said with the Airbnb example, the same is for the transportation. I think in San Francisco, the kind of Uber makes 5 times more revenue than the taxi industry was previously. So there's actually creating something, and this is an opportunity for ourselves if we apply actually our services in the future to have a big chunk of that as well. So I think we both win.
Alex?
Yeah, I think Tobias painted a fantastic picture of the fluidity, and I think that's probably the best word, in which people will be moving around their cities. So that's fluidly moving between different types of transport, and also fluid ownership. People are going to give up owning cars as much. They're going to access the assets that they need on a much more on-demand fashion. What I would add to that is that in the next 10 years, a lot of the thinking is going to go out of this. So you're going to see AI telling us the way we're going to get to that meeting, or the fact we're not going to do that meeting for us. All of this thought, all of this stress is going to be taken out of it. So, you know, Amazon and Google and Apple, of course, have been investing in sort of virtual assistants now for quite a long time. And I think it's kind of inconceivable that anyone will think about sort of opening an app or, you know, actually having to think about these journeys at all in the future. They will just get given. They will just get told instantaneously the way to go, whether that will be through some wearable technology or some implant or something like that. But there will be no thinking in relation to how you get from A to B in 10 years' time.
Fantastic. Alex, Tobias, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.